Have you ever spent hours creating what you thought was a great hard surface model in Blender, only to realize that it's full of shading issues like pinching when previewing your final version? Pinching is one of the most common topology mistakes beginners make on the 3D models, an issue mostly found on curved surfaces. Over the last couple of years of teaching artists how to master 3D modeling topology, I developed a simple 4-level system that will help you get clean topology without shading issues, even on the trickiest curved surfaces in Blender. While be using Blender, these principles apply to most 3D modeling packages. What's going on, you 3D modeling beasts? This is JL Musey. I'm a professional 3D artist with well over a decade of experience. I created educational content for companies like Autodesk, and my 3D software reviews have been featured in PC Mag. I specialize in creating sub-D models with clean topology, and I created the most watched hard surface topology video on YouTube. Before we get started, I want to let you know that registrations are now open for the Hard Surface Masterclass. In this free training, we'll dive in even deeper into 3D modeling, and I'll walk you through my simple step-by-step process to create pro-level models that will help you land your dream 3D job. Join over 10,000 students who've already leveled up their skills in my previous classes. This is a limited time event, so don't miss out. Register now using the pinned comment down below. Let's get started. I'm gonna create a cylinder here. So I'll do Shift-A cylinder. We're gonna start with 24 divisions. I wanna pop this up 1.25. This is actually going to make this a little bit longer. Then we also want to pop this in the Z here. So I'll hit 1, then G, Z, move this. I want to move this 1.25. So just as a standard workflow, I like to have everything over my ground plane. Now, within edit mode, I want to delete these 2 caps here. So I'll hit X, delete faces. From this point, I want to have nice even quads. This is going to help us punch in our detail. So for that, we're going to do Control R and drop some edge loops. This doesn't have to be perfect, but we essentially want to make these nice squares right here. With our base shape created, we're now ready to master topology on curved surfaces by tackling 4 key levels. Each step builds on the last, so make sure to watch all the way to the end to get the full picture, how to achieve clean professional topology. Let's get started. Level 1, edge flow. Edge flow plays a crucial role whether or not you'll see shading issues, especially around corners. This is one of the most common causes of pinching on curved surfaces. Now, any edge loops here running perpendicular to this curvature, we're not going to have any issue. So here, I'll add an edge loop here, right? And we could even add another edge loop here, or a loop cut as it's called in Blender. And then in object mode, if I do Control 2, add a subdivision modifier, and we'll do right click to shade smooth. We can hide the wireframe. You see that we have no noticeable pinching. Now we go back into edit mode. And what I like to do is actually disable my sub-D modifier within edit mode. But now if I select a loop here that runs parallel, right, or with that curvature, and let's just say we run a bevel with 2 divisions, this becomes very evident, right? Now we can see this a lot better with something with a little bit more specularity. So this red matte cap material, you see how noticeable that pinching is, and even though we have the same exact edge flow, just the direction of it along the curvature makes a tremendous difference. So this is the first thing that you do have to realize about your edge flow and curvature when it comes to pinching, is that direction is going to greatly affect this. So we'll go back to this clay-like material. This is what I actually like or prefer to do my 3D modeling. And we're just going to Control Z all this and get back to pretty much where we were. So I'm going to hit 1 to jump to my front view. I'll go ahead and drag marquee here when my face is selected. I'll do I to inset this. This is going to create what's called a boundary loop, and it's going to help to isolate this pocket of detail. Now we can do Alt E. This is going to bring up our extrude options and do extrude faces along normal, push along the normal. And now we have a corner here that we're going to need to reinforce. If we go back to object mode here, I'll do Control 2, just make sure that we have a sub-D modifier. I'll right click the shade smooth. So you'll note that this corner is actually getting quite a bit of rounding, losing a lot of volume because we don't have the proper edge flow around it. So for that, what I'll do is disable my modifier within edit mode. we'll hit tab here to dive back into it. So I'll need a loop cut here. I'll do Control R, place it like this. And if you remember our first example, since this is running perpendicular to our curvature, we're not going to get any issues. Now we need a loop from this direction, right? And now this, even though we're reinforcing this corner properly, now we've added this additional edge loop that's running parallel. So if you could take a wild guess, if we hit tab, we go into object mode, we get a matte cap, we'll switch it back to that red material, and you see that we're getting some very pronounced pinching here. So how do we go about solving this? Well, the first component to this formula is getting the right edge flow. So for that, we'll dive back into edit mode, we'll switch back to this clay looking matte cap, and we'll do some basic rerouting to delete this edge and route it perpendicular to our cylinder, causing or minimizing the pinching. We'll select the edges that we don't need. So I'll select these and we can dissolve these edges. I'll select this vert here and this vert here. Since this is the last vert I selected, I'll hit M and then I'll select last, and you see that now these two verts are merged. So now what I can do is select this edge here and we could actually route it this way. So in this case, I'm going to select this corner here and this vert here. I'll hit J. And this is going to join and connect those two edges. And now I can select this edge, dissolve these edges, and now we're actually quadding out. So what I can do with this is actually select this loop. I'm actually not going to worry about anything past here, and you'll see why in a second, because I'm going to use a symmetry setup where we're only really modeling on a fourth of this. We can go ahead and just bump this up here. And lastly, now we have kind of this loose one here, and this also needs a partner. So I'll do Control R to add a edge loop. The problem is this is going all the way around. So there's a couple ways of stopping this. What I typically like to do is kind of set a stopper, meaning break up the quads and those loop cuts won't flow anymore. So I want to look pretty much around this symmetry line here, and I want to simply right click this, subdivide. What that's going to do is actually place this extra vert, which is going to break our quads, thus stopping this loop from going all the way around. Now it's going around this way as well, which we don't want to do. We could actually select this here, and this is another method, and we can hit V, right? And what V is going to do is actually rip this, meaning it's going to separate these components. So if I select these components, you see they're no longer attached. So now we have these components which are not attached, and this is going to stop the loop from going this way. And here we have this vert, which is another way of stopping, breaking the quad and not allowing this to flow. So now if I do Control R, this is going to kind of stay in the neighborhood that we wanted for all intents and purposes. So I'm going to drop this right about here. And then from this point, we can just select this. We'll hit J to join, and now we could basically select the extra fluff here, hit X, dissolve edges, and there we go. This is what I actually call a reroute pattern. Anytime that you have a pull, it indicates a change in direction. So essentially, I deleted this edge here, and this edge was running parallel to my curvature, and that was going to cause pinching, and I rerouted it with this reroute pattern to go perpendicular to my curvature and thus alleviating the pinching. So now it's time to actually mirror all the work that we did to each single corner. And for that, we're going to do some deletion and then use a mirror modifier. So I'll use the rip command again to basically carve out a fourth here. So what I'll do is I'll hit 1, make sure that I select this edge in the middle. And then I also want to select this edge here in the back. I can hit V here, and now this should be pretty much an island. If I hit L, this is pretty much polygonal island, so I can do Control I, that's going to select the inverse, hit X, and then we could delete these faces. And now we're left with a fourth of this. Before I do anything else, I can just take my knife tool, and since we want to constrain it to the X, I'll hit X, cut, and there we go. So now this is perfectly a fourth, and then we're going to use the mirror modifier to do the rest of the work. So I'll hit mirror. One's going to be in the X and one's going to be in the Z. And we also want to make sure that this is merged, which it is. We also need this mirror to be at the top and the sub D modifier at the bottom. Now we can hit tab to go to edit mode, and this is our shape. Now, this doesn't look that bad because this material has less specularity. Think about specularity as a way of exposing pinching or imperfections in a mesh. The higher the specularity, the more it's going to reveal any imperfections. For that, we'll go back and use our red material. And now you can see that our pinching is very noticeable. So at this point, if we switch this back, and what I'm going to do is actually turn on a wireframe. So now you might be wondering, well, GJL, we reinforced the corners properly, and we also routed the edge flow the right direction, perpendicular to this. Why are we still getting pinching? Level 2, density. The amount of density in your topology greatly affects the amount of pinching in your hard surface models. Now watch closely as we combine the correct edge flow with the proper density. It's a game changer for clean topology. First one is edge flow, which we have, but the second one is details dictate density. And we don't have enough density. So for a lack of a better words, this edge here or this detail really doesn't have a dancing partner to match to, right? If we were to go here, we really want to think about having an edge here and possibly an edge here as well in the base of our cylinder to have enough divisions to actually support this. While we have the right edge flow, we don't have the density. I'm going to switch back here to our red material, and this is pretty much our first example. We're going to label this E for edge flow. Let's look at the other example here. What if we took a cylinder that was really, really dense but didn't have edge flow? And for this, we're going to get our density times 4. So this cylinder, right, we started with 24. This actually has 96. Okay, so you can note here that we actually don't have any edge flow work at all. We just have a really dense cylinder that we punch this hole into. So if I go in here and remove this wireframe, you see that we actually don't get any pinching. Now, you might be wondering, well, why do I even have to worry about edge flow when I can model with super dense density? And this kind of negates the advantages of sub-D modeling, is having a low-res cage or a mid-res cage to be able to do your work, and then giving those extra subdivisions via the modifier to get a nice smooth mesh. So even though this is actually not pinching much, you probably wouldn't want to work with a base this dense. So let's look at what density and a little bit of edge flow looks like, right? So now we went from 24, this is 96, and now we're stepping back to 48. Okay, 48 divisions on this base cylinder. And what I essentially did with this is I did the inset, but we don't have those extra 2 edges coming in here to properly reinforce that corner. So how does this look? Again, if we disable the wireframe, you see that this looks a little bit better than this, right? And what I can actually do is move this over here and move this guy over here. So if we compare the surfaces, this one is relatively clean, no pinching. This corner is a little bit softer than this, right? Just slightly. Now, we are getting pinching here, and we're not getting any pinching here. So this is definitely a step in the right direction, but ultimately, we want to properly reinforce these corners with the same amount of divisions. And this is where the edge flow and density, so this is the best of both worlds, come into play here. And now we have 48 divisions, but we also have the proper topology to reinforce this corner. And this material might make it hard to see the edge flow. So here, if we switch back, we'll see that we have pretty much our edge flow properly routed and the right number of subdivisions. And now we'll see that we don't get any issues here. And if we go to our highly specular material, this is pretty much the optimal solve because we do have the edge flow correctly, the density correctly, but this is not so dense that we can't work and carve additional details. This last example here is something a bit more extreme in the other direction. So we have the right edge flow, but half of the density of this. So this cylinder started with 12 divisions versus 24. So 24 was already too light. And if we step back, you see that these edges here on that base cylinder, they have to stretch and work really, really hard to line back up. And this lack of density on that initial cylinder is causing a lot of pinching once we enable the sub-D modifier. So if I disable here the wireframe, you can see that the pinching is the worst here because of our lack of density. Level 3, angles. Now that we've seen how edge flow and density can give us clean topology on straight lines, let's move to something more complex. Cuts at an angle. Curved, intricate designs often require angle cuts, and they bring their own set of challenges. Let's tackle those next. I'm going to illustrate this point with a grid here. We're going to dive into edit mode with my knife tool. So this cut here is generating a mix of tris and also n-gons. And here, this cut, we are creating tris. Now we could actually manually try to clean this up, and keep this in mind when we are working on a curved surface. This is going to become a little bit more compounded, as those initial cylindrical subdivisions have to be respected. Instead of doing time-consuming rerouting work, we could actually subdivide this one time, and all these tris and n-gons will actually revert to quad. So within object mode here, let me go ahead and just turn on my wireframe. I'll do Control 1 to add a level 1 subdivision modifier, and we simply want to bake this in, so I'll hit apply. So now we'll note that all those tris and n-gons actually became quads. Now we do have the new problem of this actually not being straight, but this is an easy solve. We can simply delete this edge here by doing dissolve edges, and we can select these corner points here, hit J, and now we essentially have that pristine angled cut. And we also surrounded this cut with quads that are going to facilitate our clean sub-D modeling. So let's put this into practice. I'm going to start here with a new cylinder, hit F9 to bring up the properties. And with this, I think I want to use 28 divisions. We're going to hit 1 here. And the first thing that I'll do is dive into edit mode, hit Control R to get some loop cuts. Again, we're going to create some squares. I think this number of divisions is fine with the loop cuts, and that was 9 loop cuts here. Now I'll get my knife tool, and I want to create a cut. So I'll hit K. So I'll create this cut here. Before I do anything else, again, I will actually delete this cap for the time being. Object mode, Control 1 to add a sub-D level 1 modifier. We'll go ahead and apply it to bake it in. Right click, shade smooth. And now if we view this, we're back to all quads, which is exactly what we want. Since this is going to be, again, pushed in, we want to create a pretty clean perimeter. So within edit mode, I'm just going to take this vert here and kind of start working these corners. What I want to get is a little bit more of a square corner here and a square corner here. So again, I can do edge slide if I want, but basically I'm trying to align and get this edge straight. Something else that I can do is basically select all these, do S, Z, and then this is going to scale flat in the Z and going to straighten out this edge. So now these edges look relatively straight when we apply this cut. Again, this area or this edge got messed up because of our smoothing. We can do dissolve edges, and then we can simply select these 2 points, hit J to join, and there we go. Now we do have a little bit of an issue, and I want to get a little bit more spacing. Anytime that you work with sub-D modeling, you want to let these surfaces breathe a little bit. So I'm trying to just let this breathe as much as it can. So I think this is going to work. And I'll hit 1 to go into the front view here, 3 to select my faces. But for this, I'm going to hit W 1 time. This is going to allow me to paint my selection. Sometimes, especially when you have these cuts, it actually tends to work. So we could just drag marquee wherever that cursor touches. It's going to be a selection. So I'm going to continue selecting here, and I'm holding down Shift because I want to add to that selection. And then again, Control to subtract from that selection. So now we see that we have kind of this inset, but we have this angle. So it makes it a little bit different than our initial examples. And now we're all nice and quadded. Again, I'll hit I here. This is going to create kind of that boundary loop. And this is going to help to isolate our detail, kind of routed in, and that boundary loop is going to support this mesh better without any pinching. So I want to be mindful of the spacing here. You see that if I go in too far, I'm starting to clamp. I could always readjust those verts, but I'm going to try to get this relatively clean without any clamping. I think this looks good. I'll do Alt-E, extrude faces along the normal, and then I'll simply push back. From this point, we'll go into object mode. We'll do Control-2. Right click, shade smooth, and then we'll disable the wireframe and see what we get. So overall, this is pretty good. We don't have any noticeable issues. If it looks like we get a little bit of pinching, it's probably because, again, of the spacing. We could dive back into edit mode, disable the modifier within edit mode, and simply just go back to our marquee tool here. So we should be able to select these. So we can dissolve these by hitting X. I'll take these extremes. I'll hit J. I'll hit K for my knife tool, click this here, and now I can basically just slide this edge like this. Give this a little bit more breathing room. So now that we did some rerouting work here, I also want to add a bevel. It's going to help us reinforce this edge from the inside. So I'll select these edges here, and then I'll do Control B, add 2 divisions, and want to make sure my profile is set to flat here. I can hit P to change the profile on the fly. And if we take a look at the bevel, you see that the shape is pretty important because I don't want any angle. I want this to be a perfect 1, 2 segments. This is going to give me a segment on either side. And now if I hit tab, you see that we're getting actually pretty clean results here. So let's check our shading with something a little bit more extreme. And there we go, right? We're not getting any shading. We have pretty much our nice angle. And if we look at the wireframe, you see that we no longer have those tries or n-gons because we use that subdivision method to clean those up. Level 4, separate parts. Congratulations, you made it to the final level. Often, finer details like panel lines can introduce pinching when modeled as part of the same mesh. But here's where modeling in separate parts can make all the difference. Let's dive in. The first thing that we're gonna do is actually figure out where our panel lines are gonna go. So I selected all my panel lines here that I want. And one thing to note is if you were doing maybe like a bevel method where you create an inset and you kind of fake that panel line by just creating a small bevel inset and pushing that in, when you're going to reinforce these corners, because this is one fluid mesh, you're gonna get that pinching again, right? To reinforce these corners as they flow parallel and perpendicular to the shape. So this is a good method if you want to essentially create panel lines that kind of flow into other shapes without having to flow extra topology, which could cause pinching on curved surfaces. So now that our panel lines are selected, we can hit V here, and this is going to rip or separate everything that was essentially outlined with those loops. So if we hit L on each of these, we see that they are separate shapes. So from this point, I can select one face, hit A for all, P, and then we could separate this by loose parts. And now these are all separate parts, which is exactly what we wanted. And what we want to do is actually add a solidify modifier. This is going to help us to get some thickness and ultimately allow us to create the hard edges that we want. I hit / to isolate this piece. I'll go to add modifiers, solidify, add this, make sure this is on the top. So we first want to give this some thickness here, like so. If the sub D modifier is a little too much, we could always disable that. Also turn on our wireframe, and since we're doing quite a bit of modeling work, I'm going to shift back to my gray material. This makes visibility a little bit easier. And now we can just set the thickness how we want it. I don't want this overly thick. I think this looks pretty good. The problem with this is that if we enable the sub D modifier again, we're getting very loose edges. Now, there's a couple of ways we could do it, but since we are already working with the solidify, the fastest way is if we go under edge data here, we can simply toggle these sliders to 1, and we're gonna get a hard crease exactly where we want it, which is these hard edges. If we go back to object mode, take this off, you see that we get a nice result. This looks good. Now we want to go back. I'll hit / again, and I'll select this mesh first, this mesh second, and I want this to receive this modifier here. I'll do Control L, we'll do copy modifiers, and what do you know? Now we have both of the modifiers here with the same exact settings. I'll do this one more time. So I'll select this piece here. This is going to receive the modifiers. This is going to give the modifiers. So Control L, copy modifiers, and there we go. I'll leave this 2 top pieces for the very end. Now I'm going to add some additional details here before I add my other modifiers. What I'll do is extrude these edges, and then I'll simply scale inward. I'll extrude one more time, push down like so. I'll do another extrusion. So we'll extrude these edges, and I'll repeat the process here. A little bit more detail, then I'll simply select this here, and I have grid fill already in my quick favorites. And want to align this here a little bit more with my symmetry lines. I'll play with the offset here. I'll go this way, and there we go. So grid fill did the job. Here I want to add a larger bevel, and we want to change the profile. So I'll hit P here like this, but I want to actually set this to 0.5. So what I'll do is I'll do Control B. I'll drop that, and we want 0.5. This is going to be a shape defining bevel. I want to drop this to 1 segment. And here with the sliders, we can get a shape that's more like this. So just a pocketed detail to make this a little bit more interesting. Something else that I might want to do is maybe bring this up. So I'll select one face here. We can do select coplanar. That should be under select similar. And we're going to do coplanar. Everything on this plane will get selected. So we'll do something like this. We could even grow our selection by doing Control plus. And I just want to make this detail less extreme. So I think this looks pretty good. From this point, I want to add some bevels. I'll select all the edges that need to be hardened. I'll do Control B, add another division, and make sure my shape is set to 1. And this looks pretty good. So now we'll go ahead and inherit the same modifiers. This will get selected first. This second, we'll do Control L. Copy modifiers, and now this took the same modifiers. And the last order of business is I'm not going to redo this, so we could simply add a mirror to this. I'll delete this. I'll go to 1 for the top view, and then I'll simply select this, add another modifier. This is going to be a mirror, and we need to mirror this in the Z. So we'll just hit Z, and we are pretty much done. So I'll go back to my material. We'll turn on cavity. I'll do Shift-Alt-Z. This is going to hide pretty much all my overlays. This looks pretty good. And now we'll do the final litmus test for any hard surface model. We will put this shiny red material. We'll check for pinching, and this actually looks pretty good. So let's view our final wireframe with a clean interface. So I'll hide the floor axes, turn on the wireframe here, and this is what we got. So here we have our final result, clean topology with good shading. And now you're going to be able to create more complex hard surface models and more intricate details on curved surfaces without any pinching or shading issues within Blender. And that's a wrap. Congrats on improving your hard surface skills by mastering the 4 levels of topology for pro level 3D models without shading issues. Now I want to hear from you. What was your favorite tip that made everything click? Or did I miss any topology tips that should have been on this list? Drop them in the comments below. I'll read every one. If you're enjoying this video, smash that subscribe button so you don't miss out any more tips and tricks to level up your 3D modeling. I have a lot more content coming up that will help you improve faster and work smarter. Now that you master topology, improving both the quality and speed of your work is key. Luckily, Blender has some incredible free add-ons to boost your efficiency. Check out my video on the best free Blender 3D modeling add-ons right here.